Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today is Sunday, August 10th, 2025, and we have a fascinating conversation in store for you. First of all, brief introductions of our panel today, including our Director of Visual Arts, Art Ramon Garcia, and our Director of Scholarship, Dan Elton, and hopefully other panelists will join us as they are able. Our special guest today is Scarlet Zanarkand, who is a libertarian activist who runs the Transformation HQ server on Discord. And this is a server that you can join using the link that is provided here. This is a server that advocates for both transgender persons and transhumanists, and also seeks to be a welcoming place for all individuals and allies of LGBTQ+ and other trans identities. The Transformation HQ server emphasizes personal autonomy, bioethics, and informed consent as core principles in both current and theoretical forms of transformation. So Scarlet holds the view that all transhumanists are united by a common goal of transformation, whether that is to revert to our younger years, to gain an increase of health and ability, or to achieve some kind of alteration, such as the idea of becoming a cyborg in the future. She believes that all trans identities will be made possible through technology associated with transhumanism, and looks forward to seeing the progress. And I think it is important to have a discussion to illustrate this connection, because there are a lot of misconceptions, especially among people who don't know very much about transhumanism. And I think a lot of people who don't wish us well, either, let's say, religious fundamentalist critics of transhumanism or alt-right conspiracy theorists or trolls, will say transhumanism and transgenderism are the same thing. Or they actually may think that transhumanism is more nefarious than transgenderism and transgenderism is some sort of gateway for people to get into transhumanism, which they perceive as some sort of demonic or global elite kind of ideology. And I hope to use this salon as a way to essentially clear the record. What is the real connection between transhumanism and the transgender movement or other kinds of transformation-oriented identities or pursuits? Because they're not the same, but the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform is very much in favor of individuals exercising their autonomy to make choices that improve their quality of life as they see it. And in Section 2 of the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform, we support all acceptance, tolerance, and inclusivity of individuals and groups of all races, genders, classes, religions, creeds, and ideologies. So the U.S. Transhumanist Party condemns any hostile discrimination or legal restrictions on the basis of national origin, skin color, birthplace, ancestry, gender identity, or any manner of circumstantial attribute tied to a person's lineage or accident of birth. Furthermore, in Section 6 of the U.S. Transhumanist Party platform, the Transhumanist Party upholds morphological freedom, the right to do with one's physical attributes or intelligence whatever one wants, as long as it does not directly harm others. And furthermore, Section 49 of the USTP platform also specifically supports the rights of transgender individuals and other individual choices of transformation. It reads as follows: the United States Transhumanist Party supports efforts to increase autonomy of individuals to decide over their own bodies and holds that individuals should have the legal right to undertake procedures, including gender reassignment, hysterectomies, vasectomies, technological augmentation, cosmetic alterations, genetic enhancements, and physical supplementation at or after the age of 18 years. So that's a very important qualifier there, as long as this does not create health hazards or threats to other individuals. So I think it's very clear where we stand. I wish more people learned about transhumanism and read our platform, and then some of these misconceptions that I alluded to would not be so prominent. But I'm glad that we have Scarlet here to help clear the record additionally and explain some of this connection that I kind of previewed. So Scarlet, welcome. We're pleased to have you join us, and please proceed with your presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And first of all, I just want to say thanks to everyone for inviting me here, to Ignati and Art. And nice to meet you, Dan. And yeah, I'm Scarlet Zanarkand. I run the server which I called Transformation HQ. I'm not using the name to make money or anything. I found there was some business that uses the name as well. But yeah, I'm the trans ID activist. I know that there are some identities under the trans ID umbrella that are they're considered harmful and may violate consent, and I don't support those. But I just don't want to bring to light this new movement called Trans ID, which started about a year ago or so, and but I created a server, sort of based on the same idea of just like bringing different peoples together of like similar experiences, though not exactly the same, like transgender, people want to change their race or species and stuff. But I believe that in the end that we're going to be stronger together in the future rather than like tokenizing ourselves to appeal to the larger society. And so I guess without further ado, and we'll start with my disclaimer. So I do not endorse any form of harmful paraphilias, practices, and delusions often associated with the Trans ID label or allied with self-described Trans ID and or red queer groups who do so, and emphasize personal autonomy, bioethics, and consent as core principles in both current and theoretical forms of transformation. Okay, and so for a broad overview of trans identity, and you can see it's the website that I pulled from. I'm not so it's a fairly new term. I'm not sure exactly who coined it. Although this website does have some screenshots of an email showing the supposed first use, but it's basically like an umbrella term to describe like something moving from one state to another, and I could mean pretty much almost anything. And it covers a lot of topics that isn't really currently possible with current technology. And so I personally hold the belief that everyone has what I like to call two faces. There's one that's external and the world sees that defines our lived experience, and then there's what's internal, defined by your self-perception and desires, or what I would like to call the face of the soul, or just your true identity. And I believe that the goal of every trans person, whether that be transgender, trans race, or alterhuman, is to align their lived experience with the shape of their soul. So it doesn't just have to be a physical transformation either. It could be mental. It's like sometimes when people are transgender and they go on different hormones, they experience different emotions because of the result of the hormones. And there's other ways that could be explored in the future. And so yeah, anything that you could think of as it relates from one state to another could be considered trans ID to an extent. But this isn't to say that, someone who like wants to lose weight and therefore they have to identify as trans weight. It's like you don't have to. It's more like a way in which we use language to describe how our identity and experience has changed, or how we want it to be changed. And so here's the next slide. And so the challenges. So the challenges related to trans RD are mostly beyond our current, societal focus. The world is focused on things like, trans people being able to use bathrooms, and whether they can join the military or playing sports and stuff. But we really are just in the beginning of all of this, and there's going to be some major changes in the future as it relates to how technology, and especially AI, as we move into artificial general intelligence and eventually super intelligence, will make it possible to explore different identities which weren't possible before. And it's very likely that it is, as fast as AI accelerates in growth, it's causing changes that humanity may not be ready for. It's like, religion's been stuck in the past for thousands of years, and they're still executing people for things like apostasy. So so as much as even just transgender people are discriminated against in society, we're going to need an extra stronger big brother to keep up with, protecting the anthropomorphic cat girls in Afghanistan, for example. And so eventually I believe that society will catch up, as it always does, for other groups. And so here are the main trans identities as I've laid out. I would consider transgender, trans race, and ultra humanity to be like what I would call the big three. And someone can also have multiple trans IDs, and they could be transgender, trans race, and an ultra human. Of course, that only works for anthropomorphic. Like, if you're a mermaid, if you want to be a mermaid, then a transgender mermaid, you can be transgender. And let's say your race, if you want to change your racial appearance from one race to another, and also be yours. So it only works with some things, but there's some overlap there. And just to quickly go over the different identities, you have Therians, which are non-human animals such as cats, dogs, wolves, etc. Fiction kin often has to do with intellectual property, such as like a fictional species and characters that you know of, like from Star Trek or something. Other can identify as other than or non-human, but a bit broader than Therians, and they can be mythical, like dragons, vampires, mermaids, angels, demons, etc. And trained species, of course, it's more specifically like the literal biological transformation, not just having to do with an ultra-human identity in a spiritual way, but like you literally want to change your biological makeup. Anthropomorphic, that means like, anthropomorphic is a mix of human and animal features. Like if I want to have cat ears or a cute little tail or scales, and like, it's like mixed a human and animal. Other species. And cyborgs, that we all know what cyborgs are. We'll probably, hopefully we'll all be cyborgs at some point, with nanotech and the immortal, near indestructible and all that. Other heart. So this is, other heart is when you get into the more spiritual stuff, not really related to the transhumanism. It's just it falls under the alter human umbrella. Other link is like, it's basically the same thing as like other kin or fiction kin, but like specifically like, someone believes that they have total control over their feelings about their identity. It's like it's not like I just decided to transition, because I just wanted to. So, or for whatever reason other than I just want to be a woman, kind of like trans maxers, call themselves. And you have shifting, which is like, it's like when you go into ultra human mode, and it's like you are more in tune with your theory or other identity and systems. Systems isn't like totally like an alter human identity on its own, but they're like people who experience dissociative identity disorder, and they're often involved with the community, and they have their own terms as well, like fictive instead of fiction kin, and they often get away with assuming the identity of a literal person, such as a person in history, because you're into to fill that void where they didn't have an identity, before, so they can identify as like Abraham Lincoln, even though they know they're not really Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so I'll quickly go over the other trans IDs. So I'll just go over these quickly. So trans age means to identify with a different age group, and I assume most people here want to reverse age, want to be, forever young, young and beautiful at 20, like the equivalent of a 25-year-old. But of course, we'll have to set rules so that people don't violate age of consent, like someone doesn't go back to like the body of a 5-year-old. And transable, means to identify with a different set of abilities. Like, I support improving or gaining new abilities, but not like becoming disabled, such as going blind or deaf intentionally. Although it is possible that Like we could augment our abilities, such as, welding without a mask by limiting our sensitivity to light temporarily, or tightening it when exposed to too much light. Trans orientation is when you want to change your sexual orientation by force, or possibly gender identity. And we'll have to be careful that things such as religious shame aren't used as reasons to change it, like internalized self-hate. I also generally oppose it because I think that people, should be more focused on accepting their feelings and altering our bodies to fit the mind rather than trying to alter the mind to fit the body. A trans character is like when you want to be a specific character. Now, of course, you would be only your version of the character, like you might become a version of Hatsune Miku, but that's it. A trans plural is like that someone wants to be a system. I don't really support this either, but like maybe someday a group of friends could consent to having their consciousnesses, all put in the same mind, or maybe a system could separate into different bodies instead of merging, but I don't know. Yes, like way in the future. And trans experiences are self-explanatory. You want different experiences. Trans body, you want a different body type. You want to be thinner, fatter. Trans mentality is self-explanatory as well. Although I said oppose trans orientation, but there are ways we could alter, the mind in the future for more productive things, such as increasing our intelligence, confidence, and social skills. And there's also I had it deleted, but trans voiced is another one. Like if you want a different voice, I'm using a voice changer, and I think it would be pretty cool if this is my real voice, but it's what it is. And trans fashion, it's like, oh no, you have a bad fashion sense and you wish it was better. You wish you had a different fashion sense, or a different set of clothes. And so trans. So I want to start off by saying this. Not all transgender people are transsexual, but I would say that most transsexuals are transgender. And also not all genders imply surgery, but can be associated with things such as, changes in the clothing, appearance, and personality. And we do have a longer and more documented history of transgender people compared to others, but it always wasn't so public. Like back in the 1950s, there were but just a few dozen trans people in America, and now the community is in the millions, with a not so small portion of them taking steps to transition medically. And while things such as alterhumanity and transracialism may be considered more extreme, like transgender people are currently the most under attack legally and socially speaking. And we have to push back against things like bathroom bills and military bans, as well as attacks on equal opportunity in housing and employment, among other things. And I believe the transgender acceptance still has a long way to go, and gender-affirming care as well, because biology, and anatomy is complicated. I think that being able to alter the skeleton completely would be a great improvements, like being able to alter the hands and shoulders and things like beyond, facial feminization or masculinization we can currently do. And we'll have newer surgeries, such as, we're working on vocal feminization, and I'm also working on stem cell engineering and bioprinting to replicate the functions I guess a cis person would have. Yeah, yes, the age of consent is also important with as it relates to transgender identities, because a minor cannot consent to major like surgeries and stuff. And I think theoretically it could be possible, like if we had shape-shifting technology in the future that was fully safe and reversible for a minor to, like, I guess explore their trans identity at a young age, like safely, but that's not going to be for a long time, and puberty blockers, that's a whole can of worms. But anyway, trans race. So, and also wanted to add, there are tons of resources for trans and trans questioning people across the internet. So one of my favorites is the Gender Dysphoria Bible and the Ultimate Research Document, which is made by someone named Vosh, I guess before, it's supported by a guy named Vosh. And I'm also working on a thesis myself, and I have resources for transgender people on my server as well. So, for trans race, sometimes referred to as RCTA. It may not be the most biologically or ethically complex, but it is the most divisive, mainly because race is sensitive and there has been a lot of racism in history. So legally speaking, I see no reason why someone would make laws against someone altering their appearance to where they could be seen as trying to pass as another race. It's just really arbitrary, more so than trying to change your sex or species. Now, I have a long list of points I can make about why I support transracialism, but I'll just try to go over the main ones for now, and hopefully we can get into the more niche topics later during conversation. So, race is a social construct, and social constructs mean what we want them to. And there's no universal consensus on what race is, so I see no reason not to go with the definition that promotes universal freedom and prevents essentializing people. And transrace people do vocalize a will to share in the real lived experience of others of the race they identify with, so they are about that life. And racial dysphoria may not be a medical diagnosis, but the way people form their identity as it relates to their culture and internalized beauty standards is very real. So, and I believe that to undo an identity because of political correctness and current ideas about what race is would be like erasure. Because although there's no medical basis for someone being a Christian or a Muslim, we agree that forcing someone out of a religion is wrong. I also believe that transracialism is valid because no one really has control over the of how the things they immerse into, like, and they shape their cultural interests and beauty standards. Like, if we put these beautiful K-pop stars in front of our kids and they come to think this is what an ideal man or woman looks like, and they internalize that, and then they want to look like a K-pop star instead of someone from the race they were born as, then that's not their fault. Because Americans were too busy talking about privilege and oppression. The Koreans and Japanese were over here making awesome music, and people actually want to be like them. So it's like, and what trans race people are doing it is gaining some racial pride that their parents failed to instill in them. And lastly, I believe that technology, will make it possible for people to pass as their identified race in the future, and that will cause cognitive dissonance. And so, forcing people to accept them as such, lest we devolve into race investigations. Now, I think people will be forced to accept them as they identify as once they see it with their own eyes. And there aren't a whole lot of resources about transracialism, but I did finish my thesis on it, as well as write a GPT and the ChatGPT plugins. And also I have a ton of resources and info about it as well, like my feet frequently asked questions on my Discord server. Okay, so I have some info saved for later. We can go over these niche topics as well. We can talk about that later. But a second, alter humanity. So so right now is where things start to get a little complicated. So alter humanity is a large umbrella, and trans identity, of course, is a larger one. But let me just say that any identity like other than or non-human makes for a lot of variation, and so there's a lot of spiritual elements to alter humanity as well, such as reincarnation, alternate universes, etc. But the big thing, of course, I'm here to talk about are the real impacts of biological transformations. So, excuse me. The big problem with a lot of alter humans, and especially Therian identities, is that it may risk dehumanization in different ways. Like if someone were to literally become a lesser animal, like, without additional modification to ensure intelligence and ability to communicate or turn back, it would sort of be like a form of extended suicide. Like becoming a normal cat or dog of similar intelligence, you wouldn't have the means to communicate a desire to change back. Now, theoretically, if you had something like the super dog in Rick and Morty that was put in some soup, which gave him super intelligence and then created a super dog army, that colonized another planet, then, and theoretically that might work. Like you'll have some real life Therians who can live comfortably, without body dysphoria, but also not completely lose their agency. And also have the capacity to change back or continue shapeshifting or something. Now, that being said, I do believe in a future where alter humans are able to live authentically with, certain restrictions for safety. I have yet to write my thesis for alter humanity, but I do want to write one at some point, like in the near future, after I finish my one for transgender identities. Now, the first for practical future species, I believe um, will mostly be anthropomorphic, and they'll probably be constrained to an earthly atmosphere for a long time, especially above water, without major evolutionary changes to their bodies, and which I'll get into with my next slides. And mammals, especially of all characteristics, which could make anthropomorphism somewhat feasible in the next century. We'll have things like horns made from keratin, tails which extend from the spine, and of course fur is just hair that covers the body. So you could have skin more scaly in certain spots, like you see here, you have elaborate designs. They're my character from Final Fantasy. That's my friend in the gang. And of course, to make the perfect aesthetic may get complicated, but the new body parts, can't be pointing random directions like deformed horns that sometimes you see videos of animals with the horns that like curl back and go up into their skull, and that happens in the wild sometimes, and it kills animals, and it's really sad. But so and we integrate new animal parts into our system and make it complicated, but I do think it will likely be possible this century, and it'll unlock all sort of new sensory experiences and ways to express our emotions, such as having control of a tail or ears that they can wiggle, and stuff like that. So flying may prove to be more difficult, but perhaps it could be done with some adjustments, and gliding would definitely be easier. Now, okay, for the next slide. Let's see. Now, the crossover from land to sea is definitely going to require a rework of our biology. So, we evolved for billions of years alongside other mammals to live on land. So, almost every aspect of our biology will have to be altered to be suitable for the ocean. Now, dolphins do get away with having lungs while being bound to water, but we certainly won't be interested in sleeping with our heads above the surface or, resurfacing every 15 minutes for oxygen. No, we'll want to stick around our underwater cities and homes for extended periods because, as humans, we do like our comfort and consistency. We'll have 3D travel. That means that vertical communities will become possible. And if there's one thing we can be sure of merfolk in the future, it's that we won't look like this, but we won't be ugly either. As people made for the ocean, our bodies will need to be sleek and slender, and there won't be a change in there won't be a change in skin tone between the tail and the body. Yes, this is AI generated. I don't care. It'll be very consistent, like tone. And our heads will probably be flatter with on the rear rather than bean shaped. Bean shaped is like curls around the back like that, and they'll blend with the neck and shoulders to be sleeker, more hydrodynamic. But it won't be deformed looking. And if we have some kind of hair for aesthetics, it'll probably be different than normal hair. But we'll have the freedom to choose the most ideal place for our gills, and we might even have micro gills that are don't subtract from the appearance, as well as protected and you're really self-regulating. I imagine that we'll also be part cyborg, as some kind of nanotech maintains, our appearance and functionality, like regulating our body temperature so that we don't have to live with a ton of blubber like manatees, or giving us far greater speed and strength than we otherwise, would have to make life enjoyable. Now, as far as our lived experience, that living underwater means living with the laws of physics in water. Now, just as we follow the laws of physics above land, so things such as paper will be useless. Materials mold and decay, warp and dissolve faster. Liquids run in water, metals corrode and rust. No fire underwater. That we'll probably have difficulty we'll definitely be able to cook by boiling, but and clothes will have to be made carefully. And most materials except plastic erode quickly. And electricity and technology as well definitely will need to be insulated. And sound doesn't travel the same either, so we'll have to communicate with clicks or sonar. And this leads me to believe that, like air-controlled bubbles, will, for various purposes, will be commonplace in merfolk society, right? As we bring luxuries from the land to the sea, and we'll want to maintain things. Biotech biotech may have lots of potential for underwater life, and there are marine organisms and coral which could be engineered and adapted for many purposes, such as for homes, lighting, clothing, cleaning, hygiene, medicine, and so on. And I truly believe that it will feel as if your entire world is alive, but also full of technology and convenience. By this time, we'll probably be past artificial superintelligence and, most of the labor required for this reality offset to robotics and automation. And in case I didn't already say it, the ocean calls us. So, and about going into space in the future, yeah, there's really no limit to, the sky isn't the limit here, right? The population growth is unknown and will likely be limited to our local galaxy group consisting of the Milky Way and some among others. Due to the laws of physics and the fact that galaxy groups are moving apart faster than light, so we'll never reach another galaxy group. But so we'll probably peak at a Type 3 civilization, which is what Star Wars is actually. And there's almost no limit to the things we could evolve into as we spread across space and adapt to different environments. We could become some kind of space merfolk and live in the acidic oceans of Titan and so on. And becoming full cyborgs may be necessary if, planet or location is not suitable for organic life, but suitable enough for a synthetic body well protected from the elements. And deep hibernation will be necessary for travel, of course, if, across light years of travel, if we even try to go out so far. And not sure if I've left this page open long enough. Just give you a second. And yeah, I got this image from a source. And yeah, there's the rest of Alterhumanity. Not going to go into explanation of all the different identities, but in case I didn't say it, trans rights, baby. And yeah, that just about concludes my presentation.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Scarlet. This is quite fascinating, and I'll leave up the slide on Alterhumanity for a moment. And if people have any questions about these terms, please post them in the chat. We might have time to delve into them, but I think this is quite fascinating because it's an illustration of a future that is coming. In some respects, it is in progress already. For instance, with regard to the cyborg identity, there are cyborgs alive today. For instance, Neil Harbison has an antenna that was surgically implanted into his forehead that enables him to hear colors because he was born colorblind. There are famous cyborgs like Steve Mann, who was able through implants to achieve a kind of telekinesis, essentially. His wife was on one continent and he was on another, and he was able to relay a thought to her using these implants. And there are other notable examples. Of course, people with prosthetics, functional prosthetics especially, can be considered cyborgs. There are runners with prosthetic feet now who can, in some circumstances, run faster than unaugmented runners. So all of that is quite fascinating. And I would say it's important for us to think about what a future with that kind of diversity looks like. Because for people who, let's say, have a problem with the amount of diversity that exists today, they haven't seen anything yet. And especially with technological augmentations, yes, as you pointed out, people could have gills, people could have echolocation capabilities like whales do or like bats do. To some extent, certain bodily transformations will become advantageous if people have colonies on other planets with greater or lesser gravity. And there will be questions about, well, does someone want to get these modifications if they want to live on Mars or if they want to live on Titan? or would they rather, say, preserve their Earth body and have some sorts of temporary adjustments that they have to go through in order to be able to make it on those other worlds if they visit? And then there would be the question of alterability. So if you have a body modification that's good for one environment but maybe suboptimal for another, how reversible do you want to make it? That kind of way of thinking will be increasingly common as technologies advance and as the reach of humanity expands. But I wanted to ask you perhaps a more fundamental question. So we have all of these identities, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think is at the core of the identity of an individual? The reason why I say this is because let's say you have a person who has undergone a particular transformation, and a familiar example might be a transgender person, but in a very key sense, that person is still the same individual before and after the transformation, in the sense of what I call I-ness, which is a person's own vantage point upon the world. So just because a person has had, say, gender reassignment surgery doesn't mean their memories of the past are wiped out, doesn't mean that their awareness of the world, whatever they took out of their lives from the past, are just completely obliterated. It's
Right.
the same person who has undergone a change. It could be a significant change, but that individual has been preserved. And that's what I call I-ness, which persists through these transformations. But it seems that identity, as you described it, is different from I-ness in the sense that I-ness is very basic. It's the fact that I exist and have subjective awareness of the world through my vantage point rather than through your or Art Ramon's vantage point. But it seems this concept of identity, in the way that you've described it, is a bit more layered than that. It's a bit less basic. There's more involved in it. So I'm curious what you think
I
about,
appreciate that.
yes, what is the identity of a person that would stay constant through these transformations?
Well, I believe that identity isn't always like perfectly, constant. I believe that identity is fundamentally fluid, for the most part. It's more concrete to some people and less than others. Like when you're a teenager and you're experiencing like hormonal changes, your identity can change a lot. You go through phases, and but and technology as well. Like once we've reached the point where nanotech allows us to shapeshift more than we are currently able to. I believe it's possible that our internal like self-perception and our brain chemistry, in combination with our lived experience and interests, causes our internal identity to change sometimes faster than technology can facilitate those changes. Like which is why for gender identity, even today, we we set laws against minors like undergoing surgeries before they reach a certain age because their identity hasn't solidified to a point where they can and consent to those procedures. And similarly, as soon as we figure out how fast technology, what's the peak of which technology will allow us to change our identity like 1,000 years in the future. Like if I need nanotech to transform into a mermaid, will that still take, like, due to the laws of physics, like a couple of months? Therefore I need to give some thought, at least for a while, before I change into a mermaid, because it'll at least take a couple of months due to the laws of physics and safety reasons. So that's what I think. People will need to be informed about reality of physical transformations. No,
Yes. So it's interesting.
does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. I think so. And I think the insight here is I-ness ideally is stable. So each person has the same I-ness that hopefully doesn't get interrupted or erased, but identity can evolve over time. It can transform as well. And then there's a question of what are viable physical transformations given the state of technological advancements. So it could be more feasible in the future to achieve certain transformations than it is today, while some transformations only remain aspirational. And I was thinking of the comment you made about trans age identities, and you mentioned that most transhumanists, the vast majority, would like to become biologically younger, or at least to have that option. Yet at the same time, currently, I can't say right now that I'm 18 years old or that I identify as being 18, even though there is this
Right.
concept. It's possible to be biologically 18 if you apply the correct technological transformations. We just don't have them yet.
So,
Mhm.
there's in the trans age, I guess, steer. You have two groups of people. The one that believes in chronological age reversal, which is, theoretically impossible because if I'm 18 years old, then I'm 18 years old. But if I am actually 50 years old in the body of someone who the equivalent of an 18-year-old, then I'm still 50 years old. Like you can't reverse time. And there's been a delusion in some the trans age community, but I would say that the focus should be more on um, setting standards and ensuring reason. When we approach it. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you. So I think chronological age is essentially immutable in the sense that you've been alive for as long as you've been alive. That's just a fact of
Right.
existence. But biological age could be, and hopefully will be, reversible. And so somebody who is, say, chronologically 50 could hopefully become biologically 18 at some point in the future. It's interesting, too, because I recently presented on LEV, the game, the computer game on longevity escape velocity, that I am
Okay.
spearheading the development of. And that game specifically has for your character parameters of chronological age and biological age, and the chronological age just increases with each turn of the game, which is a year, and biological age can be reversed. Now, what is interesting in this game is the biological age can go below 18, but what does that mean? It doesn't mean that the person becomes a child or degrows in some way. It means that the person's cells become younger than a typical 18-year-old cells today. So hypothetically, you could be
Right.
an adult in the future, but your cells could be as youthful, which means as free of damage, as the cells of a child or an infant, and you would still have your life
And
experience. Yes, go ahead.
I was just talking with my sister about this topic yesterday. There's remember the Twilight series when you had Edward is in high school as like this fake 17-year-old, but he's hundreds of years old. And there's lots of vampire series where that feature around an actual teenage girl and this ancient man who's just in a body, and they create this sort of sometimes love triangles and love stories that would never work in the real world because they violate all kinds of consent ethics.
Yes. And, well, in fiction, of course, there is more latitude to explore this. I think actually a lot of the ideas that you discussed have some roots in science fiction as well. So for decades, science fiction authors have explored questions like, what would it look like if a human society were to create, say, an underwater settlement or a settlement in space, and especially over the course of generations, how would the populations diverge? So there have been a lot of science fiction novels discussing, for instance, spacer lineages, let's
Oh
say. And
yeah, I wanted to talk about cities underwater.
yes, please do. Please
So
expand on the underwater cities. That's fascinating.
I think that one thing I'm actually worried about is that we're going to build a crap ton of air bubbles and like underwater, like and we're going to colonize the ocean as normal humans and just destroy the ocean before we actually evolve into merfolk. And instead of having our beautiful like natural biotech cities, we're going to have like giant glass domes that take up a bunch of space and energy, so that just normal looking, people will at the ocean and colonize without actually having diversity and experiences of life.
And
Have
that's,
you thought about that?
well, it's interesting to consider because for the first ocean settlements, you're going to need to somehow, let's say, separate them from the external ocean environment, because I would presume that the
Yeah.
first humans who colonize the oceans aren't going to have these adaptations yet. These adaptations will come
I
about.
suppose we'll have a transition period.
Right. And these transition periods will raise questions of their own. Indeed, I think right now, one of the reasons why, let's say, the transgender questions are politically fraught is that a lot of people don't really understand how to deal with the transitional moment that our society is in. As you mentioned, there weren't a whole lot of transgender people, or at least openly transgender people, let's say 80
And there
years
wasn't a
ago.
lot of gender affirming care back in the
Right,
50s.
right. And there are more possibilities now for people to actually have some degree of transformation, whether that be through, let's say, medical procedures or even through how they present themselves. And a good example is, as people have pointed out in the chat, you are using a voice changer, but that voice changer is very plausible right now. So that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. That technology just wasn't
Right.
there. So I think,
And I'm thankful for it.
right, as time progresses, as technology progresses, people are going to have more options as to how to present themselves. And it may even be a question of degree. Like, we currently choose to wear clothing, or at least I hope we do. And we can choose different styles of clothing. You even mentioned the trans fashion idea. So that might even be a person who may not have access to certain types of clothing or certain fashions of clothing, but wish that they did, and wish that they could
Oh,
dress
can I
in a
just say
certain
something?
way. Yes, please.
So, the biggest gripe I have with the Republican Party, like, well, isn't necessarily just that they're discriminating against us so much, but they want to define woman, like, like, man and woman as social constructs, but, like, under the guise of being biologically driven. Like, they say that a man and woman is, male or female person that is assigned male or female at birth. So, this, being born is, it's a social act. It's like, so then you have to define what a male and female is. So it's someone who is born male and female. Oh, well, that's kind of circular. So if someone has to become male and female, then, we say that, they say that a male produces the small gamete and females produce the large gamete. So if science makes it possible for trans people to, through bioprinting, for trans people to like fully transition, like, biologically more than we can now, then they're already moving the goalpost to say, oh, you have to have been born that way. And that's a social construct, but just a conservative one. And that's why I think these transhumanists need to push back to make sure that, like, oh, if they're going to be using terms like biological reality, then, that we should be sticking with that. And personally, although I do emphasize, internal identity is most important, I would say that Though, like a trans man or woman is someone whose internal identity aligns with that biological sex, not necessarily that sex itself. Even though, like, more progressive, like, people want to, abolish gender or say that a man and woman can be anything. But that's right. I'm going off track a little bit.
Yes, I think,
But that's it.
and I appreciate those comments. I think it is important from the standpoint of respecting individual autonomy to not abolish ideas like gender, but to allow people to align with genders that they choose to align with. So I am definitely
Exactly.
not the kind of person who would say, no, erase all of this. And I'm also the kind of person who would
I'm on the
say,
side of more genders.
right. I'm the kind of person who would say if people want to have a very traditional gender identity, they should have the right to do that. And I think quite possibly 90% of people will select that, and that's fine. But we need the
I just
ability
saw
for.
something and then
Yes, go ahead.
I just saw someone in the comments say that a full transition means to change your chromosomes. I don't actually believe that because chromosomes are like blueprints for the body, and the chromosomes is what is why your body grows into the sex it does, from birth. But if you change every other biological aspect of your body, then you are functionally the other sex, even if your chromosomes are different. So it's not necessarily not necessary. Yeah.
Yes, and that would be an interesting question, especially to address as genetic engineering becomes more practicable and applicable to a wider variety of transformations. So in the future, some people may choose to change their chromosomes, and that is also on that spectrum of transformation. And of course, another question
Oh
will
yeah.
be in the future.
I hope it becomes possible for sure.
Right. And then in the future, how reversible will these transformations be? So, for instance, you mentioned one of the reasons for
Eh,
the importance of the age of consent and having this, let's say, minimum age at which many of these transformations are, let's say, conceivable or permissible is because they are very consequential, especially today. So, if they become less consequential in the future, how is that going to change? So let me give you an example. Right now, somebody could play as a computer game character who is different from oneself, whatever that
eh.
may be. One can play as a
Oh, you
warrior.
see my profile picture?
Yes, yes. And your profile picture, it seems to be from Final Fantasy. So that's another example. So,
Yes, she's called an aura. An
mhm,
aura.
yes. So it's generally seen as harmless for somebody to play as a computer game character who doesn't reflect one's own identity because it's not really uh, even considered self-transformation. It's more like role play or a kind of participatory fiction. So you can read fiction about other characters. There are even transitional forms of fiction, like there are books where you can make choices, and these are even older. These existed decades before computer games existed, where you could make choices for your character, and if you make a particular choice, you turn to page 50. If you make another choice, you turn to page 65, and you figure out what happened. And then there were early computer games that were based on text where you could input the choices for your character.
Can I enter
And
that?
yes, go ahead.
So yeah, I started to think before, like, after I'd been role-playing my character in the game a while, I started having thoughts about, like, if I actually had these features, like the tail and the horns on the side of my head, I was thinking, like, oh, when I try to sleep, I'm not going to be able to sleep on my side. I'm going to have to sleep on my back. It's like, because they crawl around the side, and, yeah, and also possibly turn my body a certain way when I sleep, and I'll have to have different accommodations in the real world, like, not going to be able to wear earplugs. It's like because the horns themselves, are used to sense sound. as said, and there's different ed not gonna be able to wear the same kind of PPE. And so as the world changes, and new anthropomorphic and other identities start emerging in society, that there's going to be all kinds of new products and all kinds of new ways that they're going to have to adjust to the world. And but in the meantime, it's like before we can consent to, before we had to have that kind of stuff, it's like we're role playing in games, and we're figuring that stuff out, like in a books, as you were saying.
Right, right. And I think to some extent, books, computer games, these kinds of fictional environments, they're more innocuous because the consequences of doing something, implementing something, they're clearly reversible. At least one would hope that they are. Some people become computer game addicts, but most people don't. And that gives people the ability to explore these questions in a kind of safe or tentative environment. And in the future, the transformations could be a lot more consequential, like genetic engineering, like these physical changes. So the character in your avatar could potentially exist in the future. And then, yes, maybe there would be an entire industry of, let's say, 3D printing accessories for that kind of morphology. And there will be markets for that. There will be business considerations. Somebody will try to make a living doing it. There could be let's say, distinct approaches to safety depending on what a character's morphology is. So all of these questions, they open up fascinating possibilities that I think we might not even have the complete vantage point to explore, because often they emerge from other developments. It's like with generative AI. So if 5 years ago I were to try to have a conversation on generative AI, and I actually wrote a paper on artificial intelligence in music in 2019. That paper was not
Nice.
as far reaching as what is routinely possible today, though. So I kind of tried to get at that possibility of creating music through AI systems. And I was fascinated with earlier, more algorithmic approaches like Mozart's musical dice game, as an example. But the possibilities that are open today and the kinds of questions we can ask and the kinds of combinations that we can pursue and implement fairly inexpensively are much vaster and more multifaceted. So Daniel Tweed says, interestingly enough, greater creation is wondrously unfinished. Michael Lazine writes, he would suggest even hair morphology. He would love to have hair for even a little while, like Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. He loves that character. Well, it's interesting because, Michael, I had a friend, an individual with whom I go on trail runs on occasion, and he and I talked about transhumanism after the trail run over dinner, and he said essentially he thinks that transhumanism is underway. He mentioned he had a friend who was bald who has now regained the ability to grow hair, and he uses some combination of approaches. But yes, go ahead, Scarlett.
Now, one thing that the Final Fantasy has definitely got down in anime is the good hair. They definitely know the styles. You've seen Sora and Kingdom Hearts with the spikes going all directions. It's you definitely take inspiration from it.
Yes, and I think again, fiction can inspire reality. There are approaches today that have varying degrees of effectiveness for people to either modify their hair. Obviously, people can have different hairstyles, but even say people who experience hair loss or hair graying have more options today than they used to in the past. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the future there were a greater spectrum of options. Now, one caveat that I will pose here, because we've had this discussion in prior salons as well, the color or quality of your hair does not correlate with your longevity. So you can have any color of hair, including gray hair or no hair, and your life expectancy would
Oh, you
not
know
be
what?
affected. Yes, go ahead.
You know what? Melanin also affects hair color. So, uh, and it melanin also affects skin color and hair color and eye color, so being able to alter the amount of melanin that we produce could help us with things like dealing with the weather, and like darker skin is suitable for hot climates, and now people in Russia have really light skin. I sometimes think it would be cool to be somewhat of a chameleon and be able to alter my skin color when I desire, and hair color. Like a lot of people dye their hair, and hair dye costs lots of money. Being able to alter your hair color, big for you. I wish I had blonde hair. I had beautiful, like, long blonde hair when I was a kid. My parents made me cut it as I grew up a little bit, and I was like pushed into this stupid religion. But then I laughed, and no, hopefully I'll be able to turn it blonde again one day. And yeah, green eyes. I love green eyes. If to see my character in the game, that's always wanted. And I guess that also sort of has to do with the trans race topic a little bit, because different people have different natural skin tones. And so we're going to have into those conversations if people are changing their skin color too much, are they going to be like, accused of appropriation of something, which of course I hope that the sensitivity around race, decreases as, people heal from the wounds of history, and it becomes a topic that's no longer off limits. We could change our
Yes.
skin color.
Well, this, I think, is a good bridge into that conversation because, first of all, I'll note changing hair color has become quite acceptable culturally. Of course, a predominant way for people to do that would be to dye their hair. And historically, a lot of people have either dyed gray hair some other color or gone the opposite. So if you think of the 18th century, for instance, a lot of people wore powdered wigs that were intentionally gray or white. They considered those hair colors
And
to be,
infested with bugs.
well, they wore the wigs to protect against the bug infestations, but they were okay. Even young people were okay
Oh,
with having gray or white wigs because they associated that with wisdom. So those aesthetic choices have varied throughout the different epochs of history. Now, in terms of skin color, it's interesting. A lot of people pursue tanning. Now, I don't because I
I
don't
just
like
watched.
UV exposure, but yes, go ahead.
I just watched Marie Antoinette with my family yesterday.
Mhm.
Actually, so it's funny you talk about those old wigs and stuff.
Yes, so Marie Antoinette was actually quite young, but she wore these tall gray or white wigs. And a lot of women, young women of that era, did so. Now, again, in terms of skin color, there seems to be a certain extent to which today transforming one's skin color is considered acceptable, but there are other ways in which it's either seen as strange or considered completely off limits. Now, on the strange part of the spectrum, Super Thin Guy mentions Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson also came to mind as well
Well,
because he could be
that was
seen
because
as
of
a trans
vitiligo.
race individual. Uh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Michael Jackson, I believe that he had vitiligo, and he
Uh,
whitened the rest of his skin to sort of blend everything out.
ah,
Hopefully, in the future, we'll develop technology to restore people's natural melanin levels, so that they can be comfortable without having to just, whitewash, if they have vitiligo. And of course, hopefully, we'll have total control over our melanin, so people can have whatever appearance they want. But Michael Jackson was definitely not trans race.
hmm. And it's interesting. I don't know, of course, what went on in his mind when he performed the many cosmetic surgeries that he did, but I think the reason why people generally tended to have the response to it that they did was that the quality of those surgeries wasn't very good. And I think
Right.
a lot of people will recognize. So Michael Jackson, in his youth, he was a pop idol essentially, and he was a pop idol for a reason, uh, in terms of his appearance being considered to be quite palatable to a lot of people. And yet, after he went through these surgeries, yes, he lightened his skin, but in the process, it distorted the appearance, it distorted the aesthetic features of his appearance that a lot of
Right.
people found appealing. Now, some people might say, well, he's an early example of this. But again, I think the question of how efficacious the transformation is of Michael
Can I say
Jackson.
something?
Yes, please go ahead.
So this refers to I guess phenotype. Like racial phenotype is really difficult to change. A white, like a Korean person that gets plastic surgery in Korea can do things like the double eyelid surgery, and they can do a number of alterations. But but if someone wants to look as a different race, you get into things like alterations of the entire skull, and there's the racial phenotype that's much more difficult to change. But hopefully that will also become easier in the future. Like, well, if Michael Jackson was trying to get plastic surgery to look as a white person, I don't know if he was doing it because he identified as white. I guess I don't think he ever said anything, but maybe he was doing it because he wanted to look more white in addition to his skin lightening. But yeah, as you said, the technology just wasn't there, and he ended up like that, shaving his nose down to like really pointed and small, and that's why it looked wrong. He had tons of and they just kept and what plastic surgery with nose jobs does, it these days it just removes more tissue, and he just kept removing it and trying to fix the problems that's creating more ones, and end up not looking right. But hopefully, well, as artificial intelligence takes over surgery in the future, we'll have much better results with people.
Yes. And definitely, I think the poor quality of his surgeries contributed a lot to the public perception of what he did. I will also say there is some disagreement in the chat about what his actual motives may have been. Was he really trans race? I just wish we could have asked him,
Right.
because what killed him were not these surgeries or anything else that he was thinking in this regard. What killed him was fentanyl. And I think when we talk
Yeah.
about ways in which individuals pursue whatever changes in their lives they consider worthwhile, or whatever responses to the way their
And
lives have turned out, what is essential is safety. And I think what he was doing with fentanyl was clearly not safe, and a lot more, let's say, problematic than anything about his surgeries. But I just wanted to make that point. As transhumanists, we value the life of the individual and the continuation of that life. But please go ahead.
yeah. It's really when you look further and further back into history, it gets difficult to decipher like how someone would have identified had they known that there would be communities for things such as transgender and race and species. Like when you look at people like Michael Jackson, it's like trans race like wasn't really a thing. There may have been someone like at that point or before who actually identified it as such, but he like if he actually was like on the inside and wanted to be white, we wouldn't have known because he wouldn't have seen anything to base that off of or discover that with himself. Just like when I was really young, I had feelings about becoming a girl, and which emerged in different ways, but but never like accepted that I wanted to be a girl, and I didn't hear anything about the transgender community until many years later, and and then and then that's when I started fully being able to, I guess, self-reflect. And so when you look farther back in history, there's people who have shown signs like there's this old ancient guy called Ashurbanipal of like the Assyrian dynasty or something, who allegedly wore women's clothes and cross-dressed and stuff, but enacted effeminate among others, like in ancient Rome. But they didn't call themselves transgender. And there's There are people in history who grew up and identified with different cultures and aesthetics, which could be attributed to race. But when people who created like anthropomorphic deities that they like idolize after, and maybe sometimes wanted to be, which could be seen as like trans species, but they didn't have the word for trans species. They just thought that minotaurs were cool, and so it gets really difficult, but also somewhat interesting when we look at history and reflect and think, like, what would they identify as, or what did their identity change, like if they were alive today, and with this the information, that.
Yes, well, it's definitely fascinating to consider. Again, I wish these individuals were alive today, and then we could ask them. I do sometimes wonder, what would various historical figures have thought of our current moment in history? How would their choices, their incentives have been different if they had access to the technology that we have access to now? So definitely a lot of fascinating conversations could be had in this regard. Now, I'll have one more question for you on the trans race concept, and then we'll go to
Yes,
Art
sir.
Ramon, and we'll go to questions and comments from the audience. So you mentioned that race is a social construct, and I agree with you on that, in the sense that there's no objective set of genetic attributes or even phenotypic attributes as such that identify a particular race. You have certain phenotypic attributes present in people, essentially of every so-called racial group, and how these racial groups have been defined have varied throughout history as well. On the other hand, of course, yes, skin color is an objective attribute, yet again, not really neatly tied to race. And somebody could have even very different skin colors. Somebody could performatively take on certain skin colors, like, say, the Blue Man Group. Nobody has an issue with what the Blue Man Group is doing, in part because I think there is no population of humans that has naturally blue skin, and everybody knows, oh, it's face paint, it's reversible, hopefully it's non-toxic, and they have their own act as the Blue Man Group. So I'm curious if in the future, perhaps a better way to think of it wouldn't be as trans race, especially as you pointed out, certain other attributes are more difficult to change,
Right.
but rather the ability for people to modify their skin color as they choose in a way that is seen to be as innocuous as modifying one's hair color or
Okay.
putting on contact lenses with different eye colors.
Right.
Why is skin color seen as having
And
more
related
of a
to
taboo
specific
aspect?
cultural interests.
Right, right. And yes, I think intent matters. So another commentator mentioned, well, blackface is bad, and it's clearly recognized as bad today. Why is it? Because there's a history of that being
Right.
used to demean people, and we don't want that to happen. But let's say positive appropriation, I think, is not problematic in that same way. Go ahead.
So there have been bad actors for sure, and the related to the trans race topic, such as that there was this guy named Ollie London who became famous for wanting to be Korean. He got a bunch of surgeries, he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he later, came out as a Christian reactionary and went against all of that, and even transgender people as well. And so, but during the time that he was identifying as Korean and a Korean woman, he was acting excessively stereotypical in the videos. He made music videos where he had poorly pronounced Korean, and there was a bunch of videos of Koreans reacting to it, and it was all rage bait. And there was also this girl on Dr. Phil called Treasure, and she said that she knew she was white, but it wasn't because she aligned with white, like European phenotypes or like the culture, but she thought that it was more like white supremacy. And her and her and it is believed that her and her family set it up as a shtick to gain attention on Dr. Phil, such as the the Cash Me Outside girl. And so a lot of the hysteria around trans race and people is the people who identify as trans race publicly are trolls and they're perpetuating stereotypes. But I do believe in, and I think fundamentally people who genuinely identify with trans race do so in a way which is often detrimental to themselves. It's like we looked at this at Rachel Dolezal, and she like lost her scholarship or something from the university or whatever, which is. I mean, and a separate issue on its own. I do believe that ancestry can play a part when it comes to like reparations, but her identifying like as black it seemed a lot more genuine, and she went a bunch of interviews and lost a bunch of like public support and ruined her reputation and stuff. So, and people put themselves out there genuinely, they don't end up like elevating their platforms like Ollie London moved on to be. He just switched up and became this reactionary, people who are genuine about it often, lose that support. Similar to how there's the stereotype that transgender people like come out as trans for attention, but transgender people on average face a lot more discrimination and hardship and are fired from their jobs and among other things. And so but I fundamentally don't believe in predetermined or fixed identities. And so if race must be absolute and unchanging, like, contingent on ancestry, then I would say that transracialism, what it really comes down to is, we don't have another word for redefining race. So it's more like race abolition or race reforming. And there's also a lot of philosophers as well who have advocated for abolishing race, and there's videos on it which I've watched because it comes down to that they don't want their identity to be defined by history and by privilege and oppression, and yeah, that if race is to me thing that it should be like that should be a specific set of phenotypes, and that sometime related to a geographic location or crossing over with culture sometimes, but not directly tied to it. And so yeah, that's does that about summarize?
Yes, I think that's a good answer. And along those lines, Daniel Tweed writes, race is not a scientifically correct substitute for ethnotype when describing Homo sapiens sapiens. So there is, let's say, a more scientifically rigorous way to describe, say, the origins of certain populations and how populations moved and merged and assimilated and diverged over time. We all have common ancestors, by the way, as humans, and we all originated genetically from Africa, and again, populations diverged, and now in an age of globalization, of course, populations are coming together again increasingly and moving around, and people are settling
that's
in
another
parts
point.
of the world. Yes.
At what arbitrary point in history did people become this other race? It's when you think about that, it's like at some point we were all African. So is it if our ancestry is all African, then are we all black, or just the people who migrated out of Africa within the last arbitrary amount of years?
Yes, and I would say it is difficult to impossible to draw a bright line. And I think that will raise implications for the future. So if we do have situations where there are space colonies, particularly ones that don't maintain as much contact with, let's say, the majority of the human or transhuman civilization, or underwater settlements in similar situations, and then 600 years later, we come across people from those settlements and they look really different from us, but we clearly had common origins. So where do you draw a bright line? Again, these questions would be very challenging to answer at the very least, but I hope we will, in those future societies, have the tolerance and inclusivity and understanding to really try to figure out how we can all get along in spite of those differences. As our friend, the Rev Truth Be Told, writes, we are all one. So one as essentially being of the same level of being worthy of respect. Right now, the same species, though in the future there could be multiple species of sentient entities, but that's what the Transhumanist Bill of
Oh,
Rights
have you
attempts
ever
to
heard the
anticipate. Yes.
Have you ever heard the joke that was like, what do the Buddhists say to the bartender? Or would the monk or the enlightened person say to the bartender?
What did they say?
Make me one with everything.
Ha 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 ha. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So now I will invite Art Ramon to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a lot of places to start from. So let me try to focus here. If you go back far enough, we're all related. I did my ancestry on FamilySearch.org, which is the Mormon site, and I found out that Donald Trump is my 16th cousin, 5 times removed. So
I'm so sorry.
far enough, we're all related. Our common ancestor is this Johann von Brudenberg, some German noble who one of his daughters went to marry off into Spanish nobility, and somehow that trickled down to me. So if you go back far enough, we're all related. I think one of the ways that sort of the differences came about after leaving Africa is interbreeding with Neanderthals. The Neanderthals had left Africa much sooner, like hundreds of thousands of years before. So they had hundreds of thousands of years to sort of adapt to the colder climates, which lightened their skin. And then as Africans left out and interbred with them, they sort of took a genetic shortcut, and automatically got that lightened skin after several generations of interbreeding. So, but there are no more purebred Neanderthals. So that source of that phenotype is sort of gone, unless we genetically, control our own evolution, through therapy. And I think that's probably
speed running evolution.
Yeah, we're going to do that. So I think the meaning of race is just going to disappear as everyone decides to self-direct their own morphology and their phenotypes.
Yeah.
So I think it's really the end of
choose
race.
Their own culture.
Exactly. Everyone is going to choose
actually on board
to
with that.
Their own thing. And, you're going to have this tribalism come about. You'll have people who want to be those dragon people. You find out there are reptilians on the planet where they want to sort of idolize and become like these reptilians, and then they're going to turn themselves into dragon-like people, and then you have other people who want to emulate the Nordics, because the Nazis were doing secret deals with alien species that look Nordic, and you're just going to have all sorts of divergence going everywhere. And eventually, you'll have that divergence, and it'll converge again on what's more practical, and as culture changes. So you're going to have a lot of fluidity. The difficult part will be as it starts to happen. Is you have entrenched cultural, how do you say, culture like religion
clashes
that is going to try and restrict people from doing these things. So it's satanic. Don't do that. If you do that, it's against God's word, and you'll be condemned to hell with Satan. So I think that's where I see the next big fight is with entrenched culture, and
my hope is that
who want to sort of evolve into that future that's coming. And some say that there are other alien beings among us, and some that are coming take over the planet because they don't want
my
to
hope
bomb
is
it.
that
Sure, go ahead.
my hope is sort of that ASI, artificial superintelligence, will eventually take over and sort of push the reactionary ideologues and movements out of the way, so that people can truly be free.
Yeah, that would.
But
be
it also depends on who's controlling it, I suppose.
Yeah, that would be a good direction, especially if it's not controlled by people who just want to outright control everything out of their own ego. But yeah, we're in very interesting times. Even at my age of 53, I'm going to live long enough to see the strangest things happen, and be part of it. So yeah,
Oh, yeah, man.
my kids who are still in their 20s are going to live long enough to see all this, come about. And the life I lived was not the life that my father lived, and so forth and so forth. And just like that, my son is not living the life I grew up with. I mean, just radical differences between the generations. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting times. I personally, as a transhumanist, I'm thinking more of long-term survival and whatever helps me get that. Not necessarily morph into something for a cosmetic reason. It's more all about survival. I've had my own experiences with the paranormal, which I'm trying to sort of integrate into my thoughts of just how real is it, and how much of an effect it will
Oh,
have
you know what?
in the future. Yes.
That reminds me of an idea for a story that I explored where a sailor gets stranded on an island and comes across a mermaid, and there's no way for the mermaid to help him reach a land like hundreds of miles away. So she helps him turn into merfolk as well, and and then survive all the resources of the ocean. So and then go to their underwater city or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the legends of merfolk are many, and some say, they could be alien, or they could even be some previous species that lived on a planet and decided to sort of break away to the underwater world, and they have since directed their own evolution to become these mer type people. And they don't
Yeah.
really care to interact with us. They're far beyond us. But occasionally, not everyone thinks the same, and they have individuals that do come to the surface to interact with us. But
You want to know
it
something
is
crazy?
sure.
There's like no mermaid video games, like because all the video games that we have are on land, and it's like require like basic physics for some reason, like vertical building and environments. There's this one level in Kingdom Hearts called Atlantica, which is made fairly well, but there's like no mermaid video games for some reason, because I guess because even in a simulated environment, the that sort of full 3D like outplaying is just complicated.
Mhm. Well, what
Now,
I find interesting is that certain sea mammals, like killer whales and dolphins, are rather friendly to humans. I think maybe they confuse us for merfolk. That's why they don't attack us. But anyway, I'll cut it off there.
I've heard about penguins confusing. I've heard about penguins confusing other humans for other penguins before. Stuff like
so
that.
there is a video game that I am aware of called Aquaria, which actually does try to uh, essentially emulate that kind of aquatic experience. So, Scarlet, you may want to check that one out if that interests you. Now, I would also
Nice.
imagine that the Little Mermaid franchise would have games of this sort, but that is, I think, more interestingly, an early tale of trans identity. So, and I'm not even talking about Disney's
Yeah.
version of The Little Mermaid. I'm talking about the Hans
Yeah, she
Christian
went from
Andersen
mermaid to
fairy tale.
human.
Yes, yes. So this is a mermaid who wanted to transform into a human woman. Now, what's interesting is the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales are often much more, let's say, grim
Dark.
than the Disney versions. The Disney versions were sanitized and made appealing to children. But I actually read some of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales as a child, and the Little Mermaid's fate is not pleasant in that story, but it doesn't.
It was actually Christian propaganda, I believe.
Well, I don't think that story condemns her attempts to become human. I think it actually to some extent views them favorably, but it's a tragic story nonetheless. There wasn't the same idea of a happy ending, and what she has to go through to experience that humanity ends up
It
destroying
like
her in the end.
glorified silence.
Mm.
It like
Yeah.
glorified silence and silence and suffering, and just being obedient and not really sticking up for yourself. And what really ticked me off about the original Little Mermaid is that she had all kinds of ways to like play charades and like emphasize somehow that she was actually the one who saved the prince. But she never did so, even would give it a whole month, while Ariel was able to get things wrapped up with Eric in like a few days. Yeah, and yeah, she had a whole month to do something, to show that she was actually the one that saved him, and he ended up believing that it was some other girl who saved him and married him. And even after that, even after he came back and was like, "All right, I'm marrying this other girl, and she's the one who saved me," she didn't try to protest or be like, "No," like point. All she had to do was point to herself, like like point to herself and then point to the sea, and like charade, like swimming, saving you. I don't know. It's crazy. But yeah, it was just like it was like glorifying, the idea of a perfect Christian wife, I believe. Or so I don't know if if he was Christian, but it's just like glorifying the idea of like a perfect subservient like woman who like sacrifices and doesn't win in the end, I suppose.
Hmm. I'm not sure
But
it was glorification. I
this
think it was intended to be tragic.
okay.
So
Oh, so
yes,
it was like a point against it. It was a point against it. Okay,
yes, maybe
maybe.
so. Maybe it was it wasn't intended to show her as a role model in terms of how she acted. It was intended
Oh,
to uh, just tell a kind of tragic tale that this happened, and
right.
despite her attempts, she was put in this impossible situation. So that's how I saw
Yeah,
it,
it wasn't the worst though.
right?
It's
And
a
a
good
lot of
moral, and the Disney's version wasn't bad either.
right. And the Disney version, of course, reflects,
Disney.
let's say, some of the transformations that have happened culturally since the 19th century, in the sense that, yes, audiences overwhelmingly wanted a happy ending for The Little Mermaid, and Disney
Yeah,
gave it to them.
the Disney's Little Mermaid, I think, did really good at emphasizing like personal control over your life and like taking charge, and even at great risk, like for your own transformations, doing what's necessary to succeed and make your goals. And I think that's a great message for transhumanists. To,
Yes, indeed. So we've had quite a fascinating conversation already, ranging from let's say, the future of space settlers to the Little Mermaid, and we have so much more that we could discuss. First of all, another comment from the Reverend Truth Be Told, mind blown. Thank you, Scarlet, for shedding light to me on this very hot topic. Being an Episcopalian, I thought I was so woke and understood the trans thing, but I knew nothing. Feel better soon. So yes, thank you very much for that comment. Now, Jason Geringer has an
thank you so
interesting
much.
question that I think you could provide some insight on. How do you feel about parents genetically altering their unborn babies to change their race? So my view is, because
Oh
race is a
no!
social construct,
What?
I don't think you can do that. I don't think it's really feasible to do that, to
Yeah, I
make
would
a child
not.
of a different race, because there's not one gene you
Okay,
could
so
switch on or off. But what do you think?
Okay, so I saw that Japan recently put some news out on Twitter that they had successfully eliminated the gene that causes Down syndrome, and I think that's awesome, and that no child should be born with Down syndrome, or even like extreme, like if we have the ability to remove like extreme like autism and Down syndrome and other like physical deformalities, I think it would be great if we have a standard, a universal standard, so that all babies can be born without setbacks and compared to others, so that we're all like coming out of the race on an equal footing. However, they should be able to, make more arbitrary decisions about their identity and appearance. Like if they want to change their race, which really shouldn't have an effect on their life, like later in life, for that, of their appearance, then they should be able to do that later. But I wouldn't alter I don't think it would be acceptable to alter aesthetic things about, like mostly aesthetic things about a baby before they're born, or to like make them, or like some kind of gene that makes them grow up to be, super strong and fast in comparison to other kids, or that they're gonna grow like we're gonna edit the gene to make sure they grow up to be 8 foot tall and a Greek goddess or something. I think that's we should have limits. Eliminate diseases, and then let people pursue their own destiny as they grow up. But I also wouldn't say we should, yeah, but of course, there's also a worry that no, we would use it to eliminate, to like, I guess, turn all kids, I guess, cis, or like it could also enforce cis heteronormativity, but I wouldn't want to make any alterations uh, to like brain chemistry to like fix an perceive like predetermined identity. It's like and they should also figure out on their own as they grow up.
Mhm.
Just in case that came up next.
I think it's definitely a lot less questionable to have somatic gene editing that people can undergo as adults to change whatever attribute they like than for those changes to be, let's say, implemented without the consent of a child. But I agree also that if the changes are unambiguously helpful or they remove an unambiguous harm, like removing a genetic illness or a predisposition toward a genetic illness. The elimination of Down syndrome is an excellent example because there's no way in which a
Yes.
person having Down syndrome is better off than an otherwise identical person who doesn't have Down syndrome. Now, in the realm of other changes, Jason does have a follow-up question. So how far does it go? How much can parents change their kids? Because he says somebody is going to want to get crazy with it. So my thought is, I think,
It might be inevitable.
right, it might be inevitable. And I think the question is one of, are they unambiguously helping that child or removing a harm? And to a certain extent, aesthetic modifications, they can be performed in a different way. So even right now, there is such a practice as embryo selection. If there's in vitro fertilization, for instance, and the couple can decide which of several embryos gets implanted, and they could have some idea of the genome of the embryos or the viability of the embryos, and they can choose the embryo that they like the best. But of course, right now, with today's level of technology and understanding, they're not going to be able to know perfectly what characteristics that child is going to have. Now, in the future, we will hopefully have ectogenesis, artificial wombs, and it might be possible for a couple or
Oh
a
yes,
parent to
trans women.
decide, right? So that could be any sort of couple. So, for instance, a gay couple could decide to have a child through an artificial womb, and they could decide, well, here are the attributes we want, here's the genetic code we want for this child, and it could be somewhat related to the genetic code of the parent or not, and they could essentially place an order with the company that hosts these artificial wombs and have a child incubated with that genetic code. So in that situation, yes, the parents have a very explicit kind of ability to influence the genetic makeup of the child, but they're not really altering an embryo that already came about. They're kind of custom tailoring an entirely new embryo. So what are your thoughts as to that distinction?
So like the kid will grow up and have a different color eyes or hair or different slightly shaped features or something
Right. So,
because of the
well,
embryo.
these parents hypothetically could decide to have a child that looks very different from them. So let's say they both have dark hair and they want the child to have blonde hair, or they both have blue eyes and they want the child to have brown eyes, or whatever the case may be. They could
Oh,
hypothetically put in the characteristics, as long as it's known what genes code for those characteristics. Hypothetically, in an artificial womb, a
I think
child could be
kids
incubated.
sometimes. I mean, I think people like to relate to their family, and for there not to be a huge variation of differences, like I guess sometimes you can have genetic splits or something. And there was at some point in history where people didn't have monolids while they were in China, and then they suddenly did have monolids, and so there was like their parents said, I guess, didn't have monolids, but they did, or maybe, or I don't know, maybe it's more gradual, but yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about kids having physical features that are too different from their parents, but I can see there being like, reason. I guess I can see there being like reasonable differences, but I think kids like to not have cognitive dissonance, and like, I guess unless they decide later on that they want to have some kind of trans identity and the change aspects about themselves, but uh, when we look at then again, we also find it's acceptable to have transracial adoptees, and of course, there's a difference between them and transrace people. Like transracial adoptees, they're adopted by parents of a different race, and sometimes they see that contrast between their parents and themselves, and also the community and themselves, and there's got to be a lot done to ensure their mental comfort, and so on. So. Not really sure. I feel like the line is possibly a bit arbitrary of what we could say, like whether we should be allowed to alter their eye color before they're born. I'm sorry I can't give it the definitive definition, but I feel like there could be some acceptance, like to a degree, but not like change their entire racial appearance. Like if they would otherwise be born, with similar, structure appearance as their parents, like maybe just that maybe their eye color and hair color would be okay. Because I mean, my parents didn't have blonde hair, and I lived with blonde hair as a kid, and I thought it was awesome, and it turned black later on, and I love my blonde hair, so I guess there are things that can be acceptable, and others like restrictions. But I mean, those will probably be really long, drawn out, like legal conversations when we're writing the ifs and buts, about genetic, about designer babies in the future. But that is a really fascinating subject, though, and I wish I was a designer baby. That would be so cool, everyone. But I could sit at the cool kids table, But it's and so it is.
Yes, I think these are definitely questions that deserve a lot more discussion, and it's fine not to have an extremely well-defined answer to each possibility, because I think very few people do. There are some intuitions that people have as to what would or wouldn't be acceptable. Like, clearly it would not be acceptable to give your child a disability or a handicap. Like, let's say there are two parents who are deaf, but their
Right.
child doesn't have to be deaf. If they genetically engineer deafness into that child, that would be a travesty. But going the other way is fine. So if two parents are deaf, but they don't want their child to be deaf, engineering deafness out of that embryo would be fine and would be an improvement. So I think there
Right.
are
That's also
some.
why
Mhm.
That's also why I oppose trans IDs such as trans harmed, and I guess anything else. Like there's some ultra-human identities like plantkin and objectkin, which essentially it could correlate to dying, because if you become a plant, then you lose your brain. And I guess it's fine on a spiritual level. It's like you identify as a graceful sequoia tree, but if you literally become one, then that's like dying. So, but And yeah, I guess we would apply the same principles to being born, you know. A
Right.
lot of reactionaries say, like, use the slippery slope argument, like, if we allow transgenderism, then what happens when people can change their race and or even their species? It's like, it's just so crazy. And it's like, it's not about whether it's crazy or so weird or whatever. It's about it's about I'm a libertarian, and it's about principles. It's like, it's about harm and consent, you know. And that's what it always should me about. And
Right.
but yeah, the designer baby things. I wasn't expecting that conversation. That's a really good topic I didn't think of.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it is a topic that's relevant to the broader conversation that we have been having, but the emphasis on harm and avoiding harm is crucial. And I think that is indeed where the line gets crossed between modifications that we welcome and modifications that we oppose. And there are many, let's say, routinely performed modifications today that are harmful, that we shouldn't accept
Oh,
as a culture, whether or not they're legal. So fentanyl abuse
can I say one more thing?
yes, please go ahead.
There's also a difference. There's also a difference between an identity that's inherently harmful, like trans harmed, and also like it may cause the potential for harm to be done. Like a lot of trans folks will say, like someone shouldn't change their gender because it subtracts from the experiences of women. It's like if they're forced to share spaces and stuff in prisons, that like all women may be more assaulted in prison or and stuff, but. That's just, we were just talking about risks. That shouldn't subtract from one's ability and right to transition. Yeah, similarly, I'm on trans race. Sometimes people will say, like, if someone's allowed to change their race, then they'll perpetuate stereotypes. And it's like, okay, but what if they don't? What if they don't perpetuate stereotypes? It's like, that's not inherently, perpetuate. If we don't agree that's not inherently perpetuating stereotypes to change your race, or doesn't inherently, subtract from women's rights for me to be a trans woman, or it doesn't harm animals to become an animal, then or a super intelligent dog from Rick and Morty or whatever, then or a mermaid, then there shouldn't be any issue. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do think it's a question of, let's say, not categorizing these kinds of transformations as generally harmful or not harmful, but looking at the individual cases. So, yes, I agree. It's quite possible for people to undergo these transformations and be perfectly harmless, respect the rights of others, and
Sincere.
that's what we want. Yes, as long as it is indeed sincere, but there are some people who have ulterior motives. And I do think sometimes the critics fixate on those, like people who, like, let's say, males
Yes.
who pretend to be
Scapegoats.
trans women in order to abuse women. And that, of course, should not be acceptable in any society. But I think it's very important to be individualist about this and to see not just how to characterize a broad category of people, but what are the motivations of a particular person. And there's a spectrum. And some people are frankly just unhinged, and they're going to want to inflict harm no matter what identity they assume or try to represent themselves as being, or they might not make any assertions about their identity. They might just be bad people. So I think we should judge people
Right.
based on what they do, what they intend to do. And if what they do is peaceful, if what they do respects the rights of others, then I'm fine with it, as long as essentially I'm afforded that same respect. So we have about 6 minutes left in our virtual Enlightenment Salon, and there are still so many different questions or concepts that we could explore. Now, Rudy Hoffman, our friend, writes that his mind was being blown by the panoply of options on the menu that you provided, Scarlet. And yes, I think there's a certain...
How about a sampler?
Yeah, that is probably a sampler of what the future is going to look like. But I think the broader point is, to a certain extent, each person can fit into one or more of these options, in the sense that they want something fundamentally to change about who they
Right.
are or their identity at present, for whatever reason. And I think for most transhumanists, it's because they perceive limitations to their bodies, to their biology, to, for instance, what aging does to their organisms. And they want to alter that. They want to have more autonomy.
Live their glory years.
Yes. And they want to live longer too. And they are frustrated by the fact that right now there are certain involuntary constraints imposed upon them that threaten to literally erase their identities. And through science and technology, we can influence that, at least delay it, hopefully prevent it. I think there should be greater acceptance of that as well. And I think where
Only ancient philosophers.
Mhm.
If only ancient philosophers talking about the fountain of life and writing books about that and knew all these other things that we'd be talking about in the future.
Mhm.
It's not just
Yes,
about living forever, it's about all the possibilities with it.
yes. And a lot of transhumanists have discussed body modifications, not just in terms of cyborgism or having non-biological parts, but even through genetic engineering, having biological parts, uh, other kinds of functionalities that animals may have. And for instance, somebody may want the ability to breathe underwater without identifying as another animal species, but that could be a human with gills, for instance, and the gills just offer that person the ability to, for instance, dive underwater without diving equipment. Or somebody might want to
Right.
have the ability to fly. I wouldn't be surprised if there would be humans who try to have some sorts of wings. I would probably say
Can I tell you
the
something?
yes, please go ahead.
My very first inspiration that was sort of like trains in nature. I guess I was a little kid and I used to play Spyro and Crash Bandicoot all the time, and I came up with an idea of something called I called it button turn into and reback, and it was like an idea I had that I could just press a button and turn into my favorite video game characters when I wanted to, and run around and breathe fire and do cool stuff, or could do cool spins, or become a princess, and then when I was done, I would turn back into me. Now, I mean, of course, I wouldn't turn back into that version of me. I didn't consider that self as transgender or any other thing then. But then, I mean, as time went on, I started like having stronger feelings about actually wanting to change my real identity. And so, a lot of self exploration sort of happens for me at a young age, and uh, and then
Yes.
we sort of close ourselves off to this exploration as we age sometimes. But I feel like that's changing
Mhm.
as more identities are becoming acceptable.
Yes. I think that has to do with neuroplasticity as well. Aging tends to reduce neuroplasticity. And if biological aging can be reversed, I think people will have younger, biologically younger brains that would be more open to exploration. But also, to your point, at least with certain modifications, reversibility is important, or at least advantageous. So I was going to mention, I
Right.
think it would be very interesting to have wings and to have the ability to fly essentially unaided, but it would be better to have those wings in the form of a wingsuit rather than wings that are permanently affixed to one's body, just because if you're on land and you're interacting as a terrestrial being, those wings, well, they can get in the way. And that's just a fairly basic observation about physical constraints. So
Yeah,
I
they need
would
to be
imagine,
practicable.
yes, yes. And those practical considerations will lead to a lot of permutations, a lot of different, let's say, modular and reversible transformations that people might undergo in the future. And Art Ramon points out wings get in the way of scuba diving as well. So yes, if you want to be an aquatic
could I ask something?
being, yeah. We have about a minute left, but if it's a quick question, please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, if there is one major development among all the things I talked about, like being able to fly or anthropomorphism or becoming merfolk or going out into space or is there anything else, like the one development that you want to see, like what would it what are you most excited for people to be able to explore in the future?
Well, I would say the range of worlds that people could explore is ever expanding, whether these be the outer worlds like space or undersea habitats, or even new landscapes or new cities that haven't been built yet. I think I would be excited to explore future cities and futuristic architecture, or inner worlds, worlds of the intellect or fiction or virtual reality. All of those would be fascinating. But for all of those, there's one common aspect, and that is you have to be alive to explore them. And that's why I would say expansion of longevity is what I'm most looking forward to.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
I hope, yes, and I hope that that will be
Could I say
the
one last
outcome
thing?
for all of us. Yes, just if you could do it in like 15 seconds, and then we will conclude.
Yeah, trans rights and transhumanism is the future.
Yes, yes,
Well,
that's a great statement to end on. And for everyone, thank you for tuning in today. I hope we can all live long and prosper.